So, I want you to just imagine for a second putting 50, 9 and 10-year-olds into a single room to navigate one of the most deeply complex, fiercely debated geopolitical divides in modern history.
I mean, on paper, that just sounds like a recipe for absolute chaos.
Right. Or, at the very least, a room full of just profound, really uncomfortable silence.
Definitely.
But welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking back at a very specific moment in the spring of 2025. And, following the events of October 7, 2023, and then the Iran War of 2025, the discourse around Jewish and Muslim relations in America had just hardened.
It was in a state of severe gridlock.
Exactly. The headlines you're seeing every single day were just dominated by adult conflicts, stark societal divisions, and, rigid lines being drawn in the sand.
Just heavy, overwhelming news.
So heavy.
Oh, yeah.
But our mission for this deep dive is to extract insights from a completely contrasting, quiet, sociological experiment that took place right in the middle of New York City during that exact tense period.
Yeah, we're unpacking the Hate to Hope initiative.
Right, which was a joint project between Elhaam Academy and Kinneret Day School.
Supported by Save the People USA, which is an important detail.
Yes, absolutely. And, reading through the source material for this, it honestly felt like finding this quiet, blooming garden right in the middle of a noisy, gridlocked highway.
That is a great analogy, because the contrast between the macro-level geopolitical friction and this, micro-level initiative is exactly what makes the source material so valuable.
Right.
We are essentially looking at a real-time laboratory for contact theory, because while the broader societal narrative was locked into this us versus them paradigm.
Which we all remember feeling so intensely.
Right, exactly. But these organizations structured a framework for 54th and 5th graders. So 25 from a Muslim academy and 25 from a Jewish day school.
And the goal was to systematically dismantle those societal divides.
Yeah, and they didn't do it through high-level diplomatic debate. I mean, they're kids.
Right. No politicians at a podium here.
Exactly. They used cultural exchange, the sociology of shared physical space, and just the gradual recognition of a shared human architecture.
But, to understand how they actually achieved this, I think we have to look at the structural foundation first.
The numbers.
Yeah, the numbers. Because my immediate skeptical reaction when reading about an interfaith initiative for children is that it's usually just a polite photo op.
Oh, totally. Like a school assembly where everyone sings a song, eats a cookie, and goes back to their segregated lives.
Exactly. But the interfaith journey by the numbers from the source documentation completely reframes the scale of this. They had 50 student participants, backed by 15 adult chaperones, parents, and teachers.
Which is a huge support system.
It really is. And the metric that completely changes the game here is the time commitment. It was over 30 hours of structured programming spanning 5 separate events.
Which I have to say, 30 hours is a massive data point.
Massive.
When you study intergroup relations and prejudice reduction, brief contact can actually backfire.
Wait, really? It can make it worse.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you just throw 2 anxious groups into a room for an hour, they often cling to their preconceived stereotypes because their psychological defenses are just, highly activated.
Ah, that makes a lot of sense.
So 30 hours reveals a deliberate, structural commitment to outlasting that initial fight-or-flight response. The adults architecting this program understood that you cannot rush vulnerability.
No, you really can't.
It takes time to move a human brain past the polite, nervous facade and get it to a place where genuine curiosity can operate.
Well, I have to challenge this premise just a little bit, though.
Okay, go for it.
30 hours of heavy interfaith dialogue. I mean, I've seen adult corporate trust-building retreats completely fall apart after 3 hours.
Oh, easily.
People get cynical, they check out, or they just start staring at their phones. So how on earth do you keep a group of 4th and 5th graders engaged in this level of societal boundary breaking without them just completely zoning out?
Well, you don't put them in a room and lecture them about the abstract concept of peace, right?
Okay, fair point.
The brilliance of the Hate to Hope curriculum is that they made the history physical and they made the empathy kinetic.
Kinetic. I like that.
Yeah, the organizers understood that children process complex sociological concepts through movement, environment, and interaction. Instead of talking at them about their respective histories, they had them walk through those histories together in carefully curated public spaces.
Which perfectly explains the strategy behind their first major gathering.
Right. January 14, 2025.
Yeah, they meet up in Lower Manhattan at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And they didn't start with, silly icebreakers. They started with gravity.
Yeah, they really did.
These 50 students walked through the living memorial to the Holocaust together, and they used gallery educators who were specifically trained for cross-tradition facilitation.
Which is such a vital detail.
Right, so these kids are physically moving through the deep, painful, resilient history of the Jewish people as a single unit.
And starting with a space dedicated to profound historical trauma is a very intentional psychological anchor.
Probably.
Well, it establishes a baseline of solemn respect. It demonstrates the ultimate devastating consequence of unchecked societal hatred.
Wow, yeah.
When you experience a memorial like that alongside peers from an outgroup, it creates a shared emotional resonance. The abstract concept of prejudice suddenly has a concrete spatial reality that both groups are witnessing simultaneously.
That is heavy, but so necessary.
But an initiative like this cannot sustain itself purely on shared solemnity. The narrative has to shift from observing trauma to sharing culture.
And that pivot happens exactly a month later.
February 25.
Right, they reconvene at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this is where the mechanism of the program gets genuinely fascinating to me.
The role reversal.
Yes, they didn't just have a museum curator walk them around, they instituted a complete role reversal. The Elhaam student, so the Muslim 4th and 5th graders, were actually put in charge.
They guided the Kinneret students through the Islamic galleries at the Met.
Which is incredible.
That structural choice is a masterclass in building interpersonal trust. In sociological terms, it distributes the power dynamic equally.
Right, because neither group is just passively listening.
Exactly. When one group hosts the other in a space that validates their cultural identity, it dismantles defensive barriers. The Elhaam students are given agency and authority over their own narratives.
And the source material shows them explaining the significance of specific items to their Jewish peers.
Right, like the Janamos.
Yeah, the traditional prayer rug. And they're explaining the tupi, the prayer cap. They even point out fragments of the kiswa, the massive cloth that drapes the Kaaba in Mecca.
It's just such a rich exchange.
It really is. I look at this and I think of it like establishing a demilitarized zone of childhood.
I love that phrasing.
Like, if you invite a new friend over to your house for the first time, you naturally want to show them your room, your favorite books, the things that matter to you. The organizers basically turned a massive, imposing cultural institution into an intimate, shared living room.
And by doing so, they trigger what psychologists call cognitive empathy in the guest group.
Meaning what, exactly?
The Kinneret students aren't just reading a placard about Islamic artifacts. They're seeing those artifacts refracted through the pride and personal connection of a peer standing right next to them.
Ah, so it's relational.
Exactly. It forces the brain to process the information socially, not just academically. And we see the direct result of this environment in the written reflections the students produced.
Right. There were over 70 written reflections generated during this whole 30-hour span.
Which is a gold mine of data.
It really is. And one of those reflections comes from Mohammed Sudais, a 4th grader at Elhaam Academy. His honesty is really striking.
Yeah, what did he say?
He openly admits that before this program, he had literally never interacted with a student from another faith.
Wow, never.
Never. He wrote, quote, "It was an eye-opening experience. It was exciting to learn about one another in a respectful and welcoming environment," end quote.
Notice how he specifically points to the environment.
Right, the architecture of the space itself gave him the psychological safety to be curious rather than guarded.
Muhammad's reflection highlights a critical threshold. Sharing public history in a grand museum builds cognitive understanding. It helps you categorize the other group's culture.
Okay, but that's just the start, right?
Exactly. To achieve lasting prejudice reduction, you have to transition from public, macro-level history into private, micro-level identity.
You have to move the interaction from the museum to the dining room table.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And that perfectly frames the psychological shift of their third event on March 5.
The iftar.
Right. They leave the neutral ground of the museums and go directly to Elhaam Academy for a shared iftar.
They called it Faith, Friendship, and Falafel, which is just great branding.
It really is.
And for context for you listening, during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, Muslims fast from dawn to sunset, and the iftar is the meal where that fast is broken.
Such an important ritual.
And the documentation paints this incredibly vivid scene. You have Jewish and Muslim children standing together in a Muslim academy, lighting candles, reciting blessings in both Arabic and Hebrew.
Together.
Yes, together. And then passing traditional plates of food to one another to break the fast.
The sociology of commensality, which is just the academic term for the act of eating together, is perhaps the oldest human technology for building alliances.
The oldest technology, I mean, breaking bread is universal.
Truly. But here, the symbolism is operating on multiple levels. Imam Muhammad Shahidullah, the founder of Elhaam Academy, structured this to show that the breaking of a physical fast could serve as the symbolic breaking of societal barriers.
Which is just a stunning metaphor.
And we see this echoed by the other adult leaders present.
Right, like Paul Rudensky from the Museum of Jewish Heritage.
Exactly. He noted that the sheer act of these communities working together in that room proved that amazing things were possible.
And Christine Noel from the 67th Precinct Clergy Council framed it as an exercise in growing in understanding and love across different religious practices.
Powerful stuff. But breaking bread in a communal space is one thing.
Right.
The question is, how do you get kids to open up about their deeply private internal identities?
Well, they answered that on April 3, when they took the intimacy a step further. They asked these children to bring personal treasures from their own homes.
This is such a great shift.
Because we are no longer talking about million-dollar artifacts behind glass at the Met.
No, we're talking about real life.
Exactly. We are talking about a Tasbih prayer beads given by an uncle, a Kiddush cup used by a grandmother at Shabbat, an Eid cap, a Magen David, a Star of David necklace that a child has worn since birth.
It's so personal.
And they sat in circles, held these items, and just told the family stories behind them.
This is the exact moment where the abstract concept of the other dissolves.
Because it's suddenly so tangible?
Right. A museum teaches you about a demographic. A grandmother's Kiddush cup teaches you about a specific, tangible person.
Yeah, the human element.
The psychological mechanism at play here is called in-group recategorization. When a Jewish child hears a Muslim child talk about the reverence they have for an uncle's prayer beads, the Jewish child's brain recognizes the exact same reverence they feel for their own family's religious heirlooms.
Wow, so the feelings mirror each other.
Exactly. The boundary between us and them gets completely blurred by the universal experience of family structure and sacred memory.
I really want to look at how that recategorization actually feels to a child experiencing it.
Oh, we have to talk about Eden.
Yes, Eden Jaffe. There is a deeply illuminating reflection from her in the source material. She admits that at the start of this program, she was highly anxious. She actually believed it would be almost impossible for Jews and Muslims to interact because in her mind, they were just fundamentally impossibly different.
And that's so common.
Right. So for you listening right now, just think about that profound level of cognitive dissonance Eden was experiencing. She's stepping into a room with people society has implicitly told her are an opposing force.
Right.
What mechanism actually breaks that firewall down for her?
It's an essential question. Because as adults, we often assume that bridging a geopolitical divide requires complex, high-level theological compromise.
Like we have to debate the finer points of dogma.
Exactly. We think we need to negotiate away our differences. But for Eden, the breakthrough wasn't about negotiating differences at all. It was the shock of discovering an existing shared foundational architecture.
It was the startling realization of similarities. In her reflection, Eden meticulously lists them out.
It's quite a list.
It really is. She realizes they both fundamentally believe in God. Then she lists the shared prophets. She specifically names Moshe, Abraham, David, Isaac, Jacob, Solomon, and Joseph. Yeah, and she notes that both Muslims and Jews use a prayer book to study, pray, and anchor their daily lives. She even points out that both cultures share similar customs and values around modesty.
It's like finding out you have the same operating system.
Exactly. She went from believing interaction was almost impossible to realizing they were essentially reading different chapters of a deeply parallel script.
When a child realizes that the very foundation of their identity, their prophets, their daily rituals, their sacred texts, has a direct mirror in someone they previously categorized as an outsider, it completely rewires their baseline of empathy.
Rewires it completely.
The psychological firewall collapses because the brain can no longer justify the fear of the unknown. The unknown has suddenly been revealed as deeply, fundamentally familiar.
But this is where the sociological data from this project gets really nuanced, because not every single child walked into this 30-hour program with Eden's level of anxiety.
Right, that's a great point.
Eden had to experience a profound theological revelation to cross that bridge. But another student's experience gives us a completely different lens on how empathy actually operates in the wild. Let's look at Isaac Rose.
Yes, the fifth grader from Kinneret Day School.
Isaac's story is critical because it forces us to look at the power of pre-existing exposure.
His speech at the end of the program was so revealing.
It really was. He stood up in front of everyone and candidly admitted that, unlike some of his peers, he wasn't really nervous to meet the Muslim students on day one.
And his explanation for why he wasn't nervous is just brilliantly grounded.
Right. It has nothing to do with museum tours or interfaith dialogue.
No, nothing like that.
He wasn't nervous because his dad runs a business and his dad's business partners are Muslim. Isaac already knows all about Ramadan.
It's just a normal part of his life.
Exactly. But far more importantly, he knows the business partners' families. He regularly plays tag and hide and seek with their children right in the aisles of his dad's store.
This perfectly illustrates how we construct our social realities. Isaac didn't require a structured curriculum to teach him that Muslim children were just like him.
He already knew.
Right, he already possessed the empirical data of play. His daily environment was already integrated. In sociological terms, his social environment had already inoculated him against the societal prejudice happening on the evening news.
That's a fascinating way to put it.
He essentially had a cognitive immune system built entirely out of games of hide and seek.
It fundamentally proves that empathy is a muscle. Isaac had already been doing heavy reps with his empathy muscle in the back of his dad's store through the universal, unscripted language of play.
Yeah, he was doing the work without even realizing it was work.
Exactly. Meanwhile, students like Eden were just starting their very first reps within the safety of this structured program.
And placing Isaac's experience right next to Eden's provides the most comprehensive takeaway of the sort of material. It proves that peace and mutual respect are not just high-minded concepts that must be negotiated by leaders at a podium in Geneva. Peace is practically and physically constructed in the mundane, everyday interactions of childhood.
In the aisles of a store?
Yes. It is built by playing tag, by sharing a falafel, by holding an uncle's prayer beads.
So how do you successfully close out a 30-hour, multi-month sociological journey like this?
You have to bring it all together.
Right. You have all these distinct pathways of empathy, from Eden's big theological realizations to Isaac's familiar games of tag, and they all converge in the late spring. On May 20, the organizations held collaborative art sessions.
And the structure shifts again here.
It does. The kids aren't just observing history, and they aren't just sharing personal items. They are now tasked with co-creating.
They drew and painted collaborative panels focusing on themes of prayer, memory, and family.
And the entire journey then culminated in a final exhibition and a series of speeches on June 11th.
Moving from consumption to co-creation is the ultimate metric of successful integration.
Because they're building something together.
Exactly. They took the raw materials of their separate identities and synthesized something entirely new that belonged equally to both groups.
It's beautiful.
And the publication that documented this entire project captured an overarching motto articulated by Kelly A. Watts of Save the People and Imam Muhammad Shaidullah.
I love this quote.
The motto was, "Peace is not the absence of difference, but the presence of respect."
The presence of respect, that is such a vital distinction, because they never once asked these 4th and 5th graders to water down their identities.
No, not at all.
They didn't ask them to ignore their deep differences or to pretend they were exactly the same. They simply taught them how to respect the space between them.
Right.
There's a quote from the kids' reflections that synthesizes the entire 30 hours. They wrote, "We didn't just learn about each other, we learned from each other."
That preposition changes everything.
It really is. If you think about the mechanics of that, learning about someone is a one-way transaction. You can learn about a demographic from a distance. But learning from someone requires proximity, requires a relationship.
Executing that specific type of relationship building against the backdrop of the spring of 2025, a period defined by intense, seemingly intractable global and local friction, elevates this from a nice local story to a profound proof of concept.
It really does.
It demonstrates empirically that even when the macro environment of society is fractured and hostile, the micro environment, whether that is a museum gallery, a school cafeteria, or the aisles of a dad store, can be deliberately engineered for human connection.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to carry with you today. We just spent this time deconstructing how 54th and 5th graders managed to bridge a massive, heavily fortified societal gap.
An incredibly tense geopolitical era.
Right, and they dismantled their own ingrained anxieties simply by asking questions, sharing history, and breaking bread. So look at the architecture of your own life and your own local community.
What boundaries are you accepting?
Exactly. What impossible boundaries or rigid divides are you currently accepting as a permanent reality? What walls are you assuming can never be brought down when they might just require the bravery of a shared conversation or a shared meal to start dismantling?
It's a challenge that demands self-reflection. Because if a 9-year-old has the capacity to bypass societal fear and find shared humanity, we certainly have the responsibility to attempt the same in our own spheres of influence.
Without a doubt. Thanks for diving deep with us today.